You're listening to 88.7 WLUW Chicago Sound Alliance, broadcasting from the campus of Loyola University. It's live from the Heartland with hosts Katy, Hogan, and Thom Clark. On today's episode, we will be speaking with Illinois Representative Kelly Cassidy and Kathy Miller and Kathy Tate-Bradish on the graduated income tax in Illinois. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Oh, the smiles returning to the faces, man. You are listening to Live from the Heartland, 9 to 10 a.m. every Saturday morning. Thanks for coming back with us. We have a great show today featuring our hero, our hometown hero, back from Springfield, Representative Kelly Cassidy. And we also are lucky to have Kathy Miller and Kathy Tate-Bradish, who are going to make it readable for us, this tax plan that we will be looking at and voting on next year, which we all need to know more about. In between time, you know, that DJ Thom Clark, he's picking out the tunes, man. We got some tunage. Hey, Michael.
Our blues producer has been taking some time off. She was a major factor around the Blues Fest last week, Lynn Norman Weiss, so I have to fill in with CDs and other things like that. Michael's at basketball in the barrio.
He is indeed, down on the border.
Doing his important work down there, and we'll come back with all sorts of stories, I'm sure.
He will indeed. And this week's Fun in the Sun. Let's hit it. Come on,
Well,
Tommy.
the treasoner-in-chief will accept help from foreign powers to get reelected.
Yeah, I'll take it, he says.
Why
I'll
not?
take it.
But no collusion with foreign powers, even though it's been part of his playbook all along. Remember the call for Russian help to get Hillary's emails?
Yeah.
I mean, this has been going on for a while. I don't know why people are so surprised.
Yeah, but it did really jack up the impeachment talk, and as of today, right now, today, this afternoon, from noon on, all over America, there are marches and demonstrations calling for his impeachment or calling for impeachment hearings to start. It's interesting because some people are like, will that take away from actually electing someone to beat him? Will it activate his base? That phrase that I'm so sick of hearing.
National polls this week suggest his base isn't enough for him to beat any of the current Democratic candidates running, including guys who are only in the 1% range, beat him by 5 points.
Really?
Now, I think it's way too early to pay attention to polls, and Nate Silver of 548 or 38, whatever it is.
435. 438. It's okay.
Warns us not to pay that much attention to polls this
Yeah,
early. But
I try not to, but we talk about them anyway. This week was also in Washington. We said goodbye
to the liar-in-chief.
To Sarah Huckabee Sanders, which I just realized you meant to call her Huckster. Reading from the notes, people. Live TV, live radio. Yeah, she's leaving 1600. Do you think she's going to run for something in Arkansas?
Well, that's what Trump wants her to do. Oh, I mentioned that word. I'm sorry.
Like Voldemort?
Yeah,
It is kind of.
yeah, pretty much on this show at least. It's not clear what she wants to do next, other than that she's not had a press briefing for 3 months, so she's going to be a little rusty if she decides to continue in communications.
Again, and they call us snowflakes. Warmonger-in-chief John Bolton gets Saudis to mine oil tankers while Secretary of Non-State I should really check these out. Pompeo blames Iranians with no proof. Where have we seen this before? I mean, not
What
just...
was the fake news in that last sentence?
What isn't fake news? The lengths that Bush went to with Colin Powell to make a fake cause for war, to me, it brings me back to the Gulf of Tonkin.
It's been happening a lot this week, particularly the one map they put out was so reminiscent of Southeast Asia as opposed to the Middle East.
Yeah.
This ship here attacked this ship here with arrows. You would think they were back playing soldiers in the backyard.
Well, when in Trump's case and Bolton's, they are playing soldiers. What do you think about hearing from the Japanese?
Pretty phenomenal people's action this past week. Huge, hundreds of thousands.
No, I meant
the owner of
the ship.
Yeah, I'm moving on too much in this.
That's all right, babe.
The owner of the ship of the tanker that was allegedly mined says, no, The damage was deck side. We saw something flying into our ship,
Yeah.
not a mine below waterline.
Right.
And then we have this black and white grainy video, allegedly, of Iranian ships pulling something off the side of the ship. This is Gulf of Tonkin all over again.
Yep.
It's just they're hungering for a war because that's how he'll get reelected in the midst of other junk that he's doing to
God,
us.
I sure hope you're wrong about that, because it would mean so many of the American people are hoodwinked by that kind of distraction.
And another generation of boys and girls being sent to a needless war.
Oh,
and
no.
the
We can't
aftermath of
permit
that
it.
we're still paying for
No,
with
can't
our
do
current Middle East wars.
Won't do it.
Can't lose another generation.
Hong
I'm sorry.
Kong. Big week there.
Hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating over a couple of days. And the Hong Kong government has announced that they're not going forward with this law that would allow apparently Chinese nationals to be shipped off from Japan back to the mainland.
You mean from Hong Kong?
From Hong Kong back to the, yeah.
Well, the other thing is, right now China is cast as holding over 1 million people in their version of the gulags, which, should give us pause. I know that we don't mention human rights and tariffs, for example, in the same sentence because it's not about the deal, but really, it's a strange world out there. I give Christiane Amanpour points for being one of the few journalists still doing journalism. She had a great piece on Hong Kong
Are you
this week.
suggesting the commander-in-chief should be using tariffs in order to get human rights honored in China?
I understand that he doesn't go the HR route. He doesn't know what that means. So let's cheer you up.
Quick
This
farm
is-
report.
Yeah, quick
Tomatoes
farm.
and peppers finally got in our Rogers Park garden. We call it our urban permaculture berry garden. And in fact, we had blueberry pancakes with honeyberries this morning from a bush in our backyard. It's a little bit tartar fruit. It's thrived in its second year, and it was very tasty this morning. And yes, the ducks are doing fine. Garden is very green ahead of the summer heat we know is going to come. I just want to warn folks, Lake Michigan levels are very high. Look at the waves, but maybe don't try to jump in them. Very hard rip currents and stuff.
You and I both know from driving by the Chicago Avenue area of cement that goes into the lake. Always a great idea. Anyway, that it's looked dangerous for weeks.
Yeah.
How people could even be running alongside that, it scared the bejeevers out of me. That's the old lady in me coming out. Not the bejeevers part, the scared part.
And of course, in Rogers Park,
The
we're,
a little bit,
bejeevers
too.
part has always been there.
we're losing sidewalks and stuff in Rogers Park. It's
Yeah,
actually
it's-
dangerous to go to Juneway Beach right now.
Right.
And I don't think there's a good, quick solution to that, even though they've been trying.
So we're going to cut through some of this so that we get to our first guest, Lori Lightfoot. We'll just do that. And then the Obama Center wins Jackson Park site. Now the battle begins for community benefits agreement. Boy, they're really trying to jam this thing through.
They really are.
Yeah.
They're going to be
And
more
I'm
in a
so
fast
sorry
track
that
now.
Barack is not, sitting down with folks in the way that we would hope. I know he has.
I think he got out of practice.
Oh, yeah, I think so, too. Let's skip the Pokemon thing, except for if you...
Be careful in Grand Park this weekend.
Yeah, people who will be looking at their phones, not at you, walking into you, and plants and anything else in their way.
Artists of the Wall.
Today and tomorrow. Yes.
Let those rains hold off so we can get another year worth of phenomenal community art done with great music on stage and food and everything else. Leading into tomorrow's Race Against Hate. About 5,000 runners will be honoring the memory of Ricky Birdsong and also benefiting the programs of the YWCA.
Okay, I think the rest of it we can save till next week, right?
All right, you've been listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW Chicago 88.7 FM. Please check out our YouTube shows on youtube.com/heartlandmedia.
Yeah, that's how we greet our state rep. Thank you to our bard and longtime friend, John Prine, friend of music in Chicago, for Illegal Smile.
I wonder if he'll redo the lyrics.
I
in
know,
honor of
maybe-
January 1, 2020.
I know, he'll have to be doing something about, I got to find out what a legal smile tastes like.
Well, there's still 37 states to go.
There are indeed.
Yeah, and our law doesn't change till January 1?
So the once it's signed, pieces start to go into effect that allow the departments to do the administrative rulemaking to get everything up and running for first legal sales to begin on January 1 of 2020.
Well, we jumped the real lead-in, which is, oh my God, Callie Cassidy. We are so happy that you represent us.
And what happened those last 3 days? That was a busy weekend.
Man.
She's still in dazed mode, you guys out there.
There were a lot of long debates and long committee hearings, a couple of 3-hour committee hearings, followed by a couple of 3-hour debates on some big bills. But
We want to get into legalization and reproductive rights, but just in general, is it a balanced budget? $40 billion?
it is a balanced budget. We got very lucky with a nice April surprise that made the revenues work better. So we didn't have to do cuts in any significant way.
I find that hard to believe.
I do too, because
I
I've
mean,
not done
really.
it. I've done cuts budgets every year since I've been there.
Right.
So these were mostly flat. Some new spending in areas like early childhood, into the stuff going into the K-12 budget, stuff finally getting into the higher ed budgets, restoring some of the social service budgets, getting rate increases for some of the caregivers. So there's a lot to.
And a big infrastructure chunk.
Absolutely. For the first capital bill since I've been in office, almost 10 years since we've done a capital bill. So we were able to do both horizontal, which was easier because we've got the road fund lockbox. So we were able to put some money into that. But also we at the very, very, very last minute, we're able to get the vertical infrastructure bill passed as
Can
well.
you explain to taxpayers who hear all this noise about, we collect too many taxes, we spend too much money and all that, how does, if I recall correctly, $1 or $2 billion in new tax revenue fund $40 billion in new bonds when we have such a low rating and we've used up our bonding authority?
Well, the rating agencies are actually pretty happy with this budget. So we are credit positive again, which is an enormous change of pace.
Wow.
Wow, that was fast.
Yeah. Well, what a difference a governor makes. And that's fundamentally the reality. The theme of this session was, this is what it looks like to get things done. This is what it looks like to have a governor who actually engages in a positive and productive way. Really, even just at the last, those last days when the Republicans really wanted to engage on the Capitol bill, and he sat down and they got some concessions. They
I'm
got some
impressed with
pro-business
him.
concessions.
I
And
got to say, I'm impressed with him.
I spent a lot of time with him over the last 2 weeks of session, and his team. Let's be clear, he's assembled a pretty crackerjack team.
Impressive team.
Yeah.
Good.
And we
deserve
we got
an
a lot done.
impressive team.
We do.
Talk about this incredible, thank you, the significance of the just passed reproductive health bill. Who, besides yourself, made up the key leadership, for example,
So
on this legislation?
This was a coalition on the advocacy side. It was the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and NARAL and Missing People, Personal PAC and Men for Choice and lots of those groups. And on the legislative side, I was the House sponsor. Melinda Bush was the Senate sponsor. This was intended to be a two-bill package, so we had the repeal of the Parental Notification Act as well as a separate piece, and those were carried by L.G. Sims in the Senate and Chris Welch in the House. And the intention was to have them crisscross and pass both, but we ran into a bit of a roadblock in the House on the RHA, and I think from a fundamental lack of understanding of the urgency of the need to pass this. It took a lot of convincing to get folks to understand what direct risk there was to reproductive health, not just here in Illinois, but around the country. But when states started to fall all around us, we had Georgia go, Alabama go, Missouri went, Indiana, and at the same time, and this is a strategic effort on the part of the anti-abortion forces.
Oh, yes.
To pack the pipeline in the most conservative circuits, I mean, there's really thoughtful placement of these cases to ensure that Roe will fall. I mean, I've spent my career working on reproductive rights issues, and I've always talked about if Roe falls. And for the last year, I have been saying when. And every time I say it, it's a bit of a gut punch, but it's real. It will happen. It's just that simple. And so when those states went, we were able to finally convince leadership that this was an issue. And quite frankly, I got to give a shout out to my new sisters in the House. There's this amazing class of freshman women who do not take no for an answer. Do not take maybe next year for an answer. Do not take sit down and shut up for an answer. That's for sure, because they marched into the speaker's office and made clear that this is what they ran on. This is why they won those seats. And they weren't going home without being able to deliver this. And they were key. They were absolutely key. These brand new names, Tara Costa Howard and Mary Edley Allen and Joyce Mason and Diane Pappas and Ann Stava Murray and Selena Villanueva and Karina Villa.
Names to remember.
These are our heroes.
Some sheroes.
Indeed. And I left people out, and I love you guys. Sorry.
Yeah. No, we love you for the fact that you were there to provide leadership and guidance for everybody involved in the process. Some real old-fashioned arm twisting and bending of ears went on clearly, and thank you for bringing that back to
Thank you. Well, we now have a firewall around Illinois. When Roe falls, choice will be protected here in Illinois. And I want to be really, really clear, because this is this thing that everybody does. This is an abortion bill. Actually, it's not. And when I talked in my speech at the signing ceremony and referenced the twins and my older son, who wasn't there because he was living his best life as a new high school graduate on Martha's Vineyard, for Pete's sake, these kids represent the full spectrum of access to reproductive health care, from birth control and fertility treatment to the abortion I had to have, to having choices, being able to make choices about how I delivered them. And frankly, now, as I approach menopause, having access to choices about how I address those symptoms. That's what reproductive health care is. And when folks focus on that one procedure, they miss the entire spectrum, because without everything else that went along with it, I still wouldn't have those boys. The abortion was important. I had to save my life and my fertility, but I also had to have access to all of the things that went into making those babies.
And ultimately have your own choices about what to do with your health care, which is what we should not be trying to legislate or end up in front of a Supreme Court.
Exactly.
Thank you for that share, Cassidy.
No doctors in the General Assembly. That's the reality. I'm not one, and neither are any of the people who spent hours grilling me about this.
So the other thing there's so much to talk about here. I personally would like to know about gambling, but so I'll just throw it out there.
Well, since you brought it up.
Go for it.
With pot legalized, it seems like we're now going to rely on a lot of sin taxes to fund state government. Huge increase in gambling, which in my mind is sad, because I just see addicted gamblers being the ones who will suffer from that, and the state maybe gets a few convention year dollars that I would love us to find other ways to capture, better restaurants, better food, better entertainment than a casino. So how was it for you to push forward or agree to all these increases in what I'm calling sin taxes, but this, huge increase in gambling when I'm not sure there are that many more dollars there as a practical matter?
Actually, I think there probably are, but I'm going to start with the caveat that if I were in the General Assembly for the first vote on gaming, I might have been a no, because I feel the same way you do. But this is not just closing the barn door after the horse is out. The horse is 6 counties over and has reproduced hundreds of times at this point. The reality of gaming here in Illinois, and the question of whether there's more dollars, I watch those buses load on Broadway every day and drive people to Indiana. So my hope is that those buses will stop. So we will at least capture those dollars that are going to Indiana, and at the same time have the capacity. And this is another moment for those freshman women and some of the women of the House Democratic Women's Caucus. They put their foot down, stood up as a group, and refused to support the gaming bill until there was significant dollars connected to mental health and addiction treatment. So I was pretty proud of that group as well.
The question about where the largest in the state Chicago casino might end up is probably more on Lori Lightfoot's desk along with the city council, but you just mentioned a whole bunch of new named state legislators who might also have some self-interest in where that casino is sited. Just to throw a crazy idea out there, what about the Southeast Side Steelworks site, even closer to Indiana, to pull those customers in? Will conventioneers go out there, or are we committed to something downtown like Resco Land?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I will say those new women that I talked about, they're all DuPagers, which is amazing. Like, we flipped seats like crazy out there. So, in terms of where the Chicago casino gets sited, they're not really going to have a lot of skin in that game. And it is a question not just for the new mayor, but this amazing. We got a freshman class in this council that's making moves.
They're already showing their stuff.
Right, exactly. Yeah. There's an opportunity there. And I've actually started talking to some of them about doing the same in the ways that Chicago handles the cannabis zoning laws and how the revenue will be done. So I'm having a lot of fun with that group as well. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for creativity with placement of the Chicago casino. Yes, you want to make sure conventioneers go. But there are methods to make that happen.
You mentioned the speaker earlier. One thing that didn't happen was a significant change in the way property tax assessments are done, particularly on commercial property. It passed the Senate, but it didn't pass the House. And of course, some of us wonder if that's because the speaker was afraid of losing personal business. If commercial property owners had to disclose information about revenue and expenses earlier in the process of appeals. Why didn't that modest change go through? He did get another change for automatic renewal of the senior exemption.
Right. To be honest with you, I had a lot of running chainsaws in my juggling act this session, so I was not as plugged in on that one as I ordinarily would have been. That's a decent theory,
okay,
frankly. But I can't say with any certainty what led to it. That was one of those that so many times it was dead and it was alive. It was dead. It was alive. And there's also, frankly, just the possibility that sheer volume of what we moved in this session. We moved more than we've moved in, the last 4 sessions combined. And so there probably was, to some extent, a question of bandwidth as well.
Okay.
There's also some lesser-known legislative pieces. I was happy that Thom introduced this into my thinking, including the skin cancer screening and judicial admonishment for undocumented. Could you talk about those specific things?
Yeah, it was sort of funny when I started doing my end of session roundup, and I did, looked at the things that weren't the 2 things that had pictures of me ugly crying on the front page of papers all over the country.
You loved it. You said, "I'm ugly crying. Deal with it."
Exactly. At the RHA signing, the governor was like, "You got this lapel already. Let's do this one." So he remembered the last night of session too. Looking at what went through at the beginning, like, that was a gracious plenty. Those 2 bills, as well as the ban on for-profit detention centers that I anticipate is going to be signed in the next week or 2.
That is thrilling.
Absolutely. And that will happen in time to be able to prevent the city of Dwight from entering into the RFP with ICE. So that has been really, really gratifying. That's a bill that in 2012 failed by 1 vote. This year, let's be clear, this was a smack in the face to that guy's administration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I got 16 Republican votes on that bill.
Mm-hmm.
Shine up.
They have to be reading the numbers.
They do, absolutely. And it's, when you talk about for-profit incarceration, it's really hard for anyone with an ounce of humanity to argue that it makes sense. I had one guy argue, well, if we don't do it, they're going to go to another state. At least if it's here, well, you'll be looking over their shoulders.
Like prisoner savage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think I'll do my time in, let's see, where's the nice one with the racquetball court?
Well, I mean, then they're not talking about the detainees. They're talking about these companies, and we had a woman testify who had just been so horribly treated. She found a lump in her breast and was punished for asking for medical care. She was put in solitary as a result of.
There's so many endless stories.
It's stunning.
About the mistreatment of people. It's really
So,
un-American.
and then the what's called alien admonishment, which is a terrible name, but that's what it's called in the code. For years, we've had it on the books that when somebody enters into a plea agreement, there's a whole list of things that have to be read to warn them before they take a plea. And there was language about warning related to your immigration status, but there was no consequence if it wasn't done. It was the only one that had no consequence if it wasn't done, ironically enough. So we had to clean that up. It took me 3 years to pass this bill. This was presented to me originally as something pretty simple because, the prosecutors needed it. This was an order of the Illinois Supreme Court that we had to fix this. And there was so much hatred of immigrants in the chamber that it would pass the Senate unanimously and I would fail with, lose by 10 votes. So this was gratifying to get this one through too.
In our remaining time, let's talk a little bit.
One thing, skin cancer screening.
Absolutely. So I'm a frequent survivor of skin cancer.
Me too.
Me too.
I'm covered in missing bits.
We're a bunch of
I'm going to disappear
Irish skin people.
Exactly. I'm going to disappear millimeter by millimeter. But I was stunned to realize when I called a couple of years ago for my annual screening that the doctor's scheduler said, I have to read this to you. And she, pointed out that this is that this is subject to copay because it's not considered preventative care. So when I went in, I asked him about it, and he said that people were complaining after they got their bills, thinking it was a regular checkup. So there ought to be a law. So there is. So I worked with the medical society and the dermatologists to make sure that we could make it possible for folks to get an annual screening because, frankly, it will save lives. I have a good friend who's battling stage 4 melanoma right now, and he's one of my best friends in the world, and I'm terrified. I see my dermatologist as often as I see my dentist.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me how much the business of medicine prevents good health care.
Yeah.
I mean, everything's copay these days. I'm on Medicare, and everything's copay these days.
Yeah.
Up to a certain point, and then it's free
Right.
the rest of the year.
Right.
So it's pretty crazy. Let's take it a little bit more into the legalization issue.
Yeah.
Explain how expungement got through or not, and how many people will be affected by it.
Sure. So, going into this, I was, and Heather Staines as well, we were determined that we were going to do this differently than any other state had done it. The states that have done it by ballot initiative. It's largely been industry driven. It's been about what the industry looks like, how the marketplace is developed. For us, this was a criminal justice reform issue. This was a social justice issue. This was an equity issue. So everything we did was through that lens, and we really flipped that script. And New York has already picked up our language and is working on their own version of it. We have become the blueprint. And the biggest piece for me, even states that have done some expungement work around people's records related to the war on drugs, they've done it in sort of little bites. The state that has done the most up to this point has affected 50,000 people. And part of that is because they haven't been able to do it in an automated way. So folks have to proactively take the step of applying for expungement. What we know is that, records that are that old, you may not remember what your charge was. You may not know you're eligible. You may not have any idea that this is an option. You may think that the system is still rigged against you and it's not going to go through anyway. So we would see 1% participation in these programs around the country. So we were adamant that this had to be automatic. And so what we've got in this law will impact, I believe the estimate is 770,000 records, which is about 500,000 people.
Wow.
And most of those...
will now have an easier time getting a job.
Job,
amongst other
housing, access to education...
personal esteem.
Exactly. Just knowing that you're not wearing the scarlet F. Mm-hmm. Just getting that off your back is huge.
Does it stand for felon?
Yeah. That's what I was going with there.
Just wanted to.
Thanks for clarifying my obscure reference. So, and most of those will be automatic. There's a small chunk of folks who will be eligible for lack of a better way, semi-automatic process. Those are folks who, when we changed
something else going on.
They had something
the
else going on.
The more hardened user types,
right? who would have had a much higher quantity of product on them, and that's only for the folks in the last couple of years when we changed the law and a felony was a higher quantity. So our opposition was really concerned about the expungement. This was one of the harder pieces to get over the finish line. They didn't want to do automatic. They didn't want to do folks that had higher quantities. They didn't want to do folks that may have had any indicia of dealing. For me, and I said this from the beginning, I want to get the kid on the corner. I want to make sure the kid on the corner can get a job in the industry. The guy that put him there, not my problem. But the
Right.
kid on the corner, I want him to get a job. And so that was always our measure, making sure that we're taking care of the casual user up to that kid. And that's what we did.
Nice work. I wish. I mean, sorry. If Michael was here, he would be
So
asking.
let me ask the Michael question. What's
you
the
want-
price going to be compared to medical dispensary price in the gray market?
Yeah, so our prices here in Illinois are pretty high because we've done a really crappy job of building our medical program. We've had the most restrictive program in the country. We have the smallest patient count in the country. It's growing currently because of the opioid alternative program and taking away the fingerprinting requirement for patients. Good Lord.
Lord.
Cancer does a background check before it invades your body. So just ridiculous. So that was in a bill I passed last year, getting that fingerprinting requirement taken away, getting the opioid alternative program put in place. So patient count is starting to grow. And I mean, we do live in a capitalist society, so supply and demand is going to drive these prices. And what we've seen in other states, as the market grows, the prices come down. And so we should begin to see prices come down, and then, of course, once the market opens up, we'll most definitely see more. Working really hard to try to manage that supply side to ensure that there's supply available on day one. Every state on day one has had shortages. We very well may, but we're doing our best to make sure that we can grow into that space.
So, Representative, were you going to jump in again? Are you going to do a Michael thing?
I was just wondering how the baseball
doing
season
a
is
Michael
going so far.
The baseball season is going so far well. The Loyola Park Giants squeaked one out against the Loyola Park Angels last night.
All right.
Love him.
Daniel, as the starting pitcher, had a good run. He got
Nice.
got a couple good hits. We had some folks. We had 2 home runs out of the team. It was a good night at Loyola Park. I would love to see more of my neighbors just come and hang. Bring your little grills and bring your little dogs. I had Jack, my new Mastiff puppy, named for the Emperor, Jack Herrera. He came into our lives as a reward for surviving this session. Jack was out there living his best life. Join us. It's a great way to meet your neighbors, and it's a great way to keep these kids safe in the park because we have had some issues out there. So I would like my neighbors to join me, and anybody with teen kids, come play baseball, man.
Representative Kelly Cassidy, once again, proving to us when you pay attention and you've got good candidates, you get good results. Thank you, State Representative Kelly Cassidy, and thanks for getting up early and talking to everybody today.
Glad
Thanks
you're
for
our
having
voice
me.
in Springfield.
And thank you to the people at Rogers Park, Edgewater, Andersonville, and Evanston for giving me this job because I love it.
Yay! You are listening to Live from the Heartland, WLUW Chicago 88.7 FM and WLUW.org. Please like us on Facebook, and we will come back with a couple of great guests. All right, Martha and the Vandellas from our youth. Oh, Tom, you're giving up our age here.
Well, this is one of our guests' favorite songs.
Okay, that's how we get them. You want to introduce our guests?
Namely, Kathy Miller was trying to also go back to her youth, I think, and was dancing away here in the studio. She is joined by Kathy Tate-Bradish. They are both here to talk from their activist background about this graduated income tax and what connection there might be to population loss and stuff like that. We had a big boost in funding during the last General Assembly session. Do you think this was a good deal? In particular, how we're getting the revenue?
I'll start. Yes, more revenue is good. Is it enough? Absolutely not. We've got the billions of dollar backlog, bills that still need to be paid, schools that are in disrepair that haven't been able to invest for years. So more money is good. More regressive money just increases the income inequality gap. And so mixed blessing.
We still have some work to do.
Oh, do we ever?
Lots of work.
Aren't rising taxes one of the prime drivers to this loss of population in the city in Illinois?
Well, that's one of the things that was bothering me, Tom, when I, had my
This is
little
Kathy
discussion
Miller.
with you, Kathy Miller. And I feel like this is kind of a red herring, and it's an excuse because there are lots of reasons the state is losing population. I have to say, first of all, personally, it's the weather. This last winter was brutal. And, closing.
I agree. That's always the reason given. Go ahead, Katy.
People close, offices at least 3 times this winter because of, minus 30-degree wind chill factor.
Right.
So the people are moving out of state. One of the third reason for people leaving the state is retirement. And this was the United Van Line survey in January 22nd. And so states that are having people move out, number 1 is New Jersey, and we've talked about them, Illinois, Connecticut, New York, Kansas. But I think that one of them is that people want to go to warmer climates. But there's also some unfairness going on in this state.
No.
So, some people are even moving to California with a 13% tax bracket. So 4 in 10 people are going to New Mexico. And Florida came in second, and Arizona follows as the third place to go. So they're going to warmer weather. I think that speaks to it.
Or prettier places. Like New
prettier.
Mexico.
But you don't just pick up and say, I'm going warmer if you don't have a job. And if
unless you're retiring.
Exactly. If you've got your retirement income, and if that's enough, but
Right.
people who haven't made enough. So you can lower expenses, but the tax friendliness is only a part of it for retirees. So that's like a third of the population loss. And I brought you, you had a question
Audio
about
visuals.
audio
Attention,
visuals on the radio.
audience. We got some audio visuals here.
But you were going to have a question about per capita, spending, per capita burden. And when you look at a map, Illinois is like 1,036 per capita burden.
What does that mean?
That is how much each person would spend. And,
On their overall Illinois tax burden.
And so California comes at 2,130, and Oregon 2,000, in Minnesota 1,900. We were talking. Kathy's going to Tate-Bradish is going to talk about more of our neighboring states. I'm just here to say that every time I turned around when I looked at Crane Chicago Business or Chicago Tribune, we found they were blaming taxes. And now I see on my Facebook page that people just automatically talk about, those taxes. And we think about, as Kathy made the point, if you want, we don't like paying rent or mortgages, but you like a roof over your head. And we remember about when we were very young, the Eisenhower era of high taxes that built these roads and built schools and interstate transportation, and we went to the moon, things like that, where we can't do that these days. So every time I turn around, somebody wants to blame taxes. So I feel like walking around, there are other unfairnesses that stick in your craw. We were talking about the CEO pay gap that they were talking about, some of our major corporations here.
Yeah.
And the CEO pay at a Standard & Poor 500 index firm soared an average of 362 times more than the average rank and file worker. So that's $13.9 million a year. And this was from the AFL-CIO's Executive Pay Watch.
Is there ever an enough in these people's minds?
I'm not sure for them.
What's enough?
What's enough?
So generally what you're saying is our per capita burden is not that high compared to other states that have far higher per capita spending.
Yeah, Tom, that's absolutely right. We are, depending on which figures you look at, about the 5th biggest economy in the country. But we have really one of the lowest tax burdens. And if you want to look at our contiguous states, because people are always like, they're going to cross the line into the next state and do whatever, only one state has a lower tax burden than we do, which is the other flat tax Midwest state, Indiana. Everybody else's is higher than ours and doing better, basically. So when Minnesota raised their state income tax, and they've got one of the highest top marginal rates in the country. What happened? They've got a $1.2 billion surplus, and their economy is growing faster than any other Midwestern state. They're a neighbor of ours. Iowa, they've got a higher top marginal rate than what's being proposed for us. Their economy is doing better. It's just not truthful to say that our taxes are going to be so high and that people are going to be leaving because of taxes. And one thing that Kathy and I have both seen is lots of people say that they leave because of taxes, but we discover they've gone to a retirement state, or they've gone to California or New York, which have higher taxes. People move for jobs, they move for family, they move for weather. Some corporations don't come to us because of crumbling infrastructure and poor schools. There was a top CEO recently who didn't take a promotion to Chicago because her child had special needs and she didn't feel that he was going to get a good education here. And that's underfunding. So taxes are important. Taxes are not why people leave.
So this hints at why the League of Women Voters has been supporting a graduated income tax. Can you explain a little bit the history of that as a volunteer for
I would love
League?
to. Yes, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Evanston and also League of Women Voters of the state of Illinois. We have, in 1969, we actually advocated against putting the flat tax in the Constitution. People might not know that that our flat tax is ingrained in the Constitution. It's important to know because of a vote we've got coming up in November. Right. So, starting in the late 70s, the League has joined various coalitions to try to get a graduated rate income tax, which we're now calling a fair tax. So don't be confused if you see graduated rate state income tax, graduated rate tax, graduated tax, or fair tax. In the state of Illinois, we're talking about putting in marginal rates and taxing people who can more easily pay more money. Going to be on the ballot in November, I'm sure, November of 2020. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the League of Women Voters is political but nonpartisan, and we think of ourselves as the good government people. So a flat tax is not good government because it's regressive and it contributes to the growing income inequality. Illinois is one of the states with the biggest income inequality gap, and it's growing. And part of that is because of our regressive tax. Then, in addition to that, wanting fairness in taxation, we're very big in social policy, social good. And so we believe that taxes need to be high enough to equitably fund our schools, to fund social workers, to fund public safety, and not just K through 12 schools, but secondary higher education. And so a flat tax can never get us there because the legislators, make no mistake, can raise taxes whenever they want to. That's their job. It's within their bailiwick. Right. It's within their purview. They've done it in the last 10 years. We've had our income tax raised. Mm-hmm. They can do it. But they can't get 7.95% out of the super wealthy people without having 7.9% on the poorest people because we have a flat tax. So they can do whatever they want, actually, but we can't get an equitable revenue source without amending the Constitution so that we can have a graduated tax.
So what is the significance of the proposal to put tax reform in the constitutional amendment form on the ballot? What is that significance?
Both of them. Because it's in the Constitution, we have to have an amendment to change it. It mandates a flat tax. And then, because it's revenue, it had to have been passed by the legislature and put on the ballot. So, for fairer mapping, for example, people are going around and getting signatures. We couldn't do that for this revenue bill. So it had to come from the legislature. And it is hugely significant. So, by the way, in 1994, I went around the state promoting this. The League of Women Voters was part of a coalition, and it didn't get called for a vote. So we have to have a supermajority of the House and Senate vote to put it on the ballot. 2014, same thing. I came to love Quincy and Bloomington, and a bunch of us went around the state, didn't get called for a vote to put it on the ballot. So this time, not only did it get called for a vote by the legislature, it was passed and it's going to be on the ballot in 2020. Luckily, it gives us some time to convince people to vote for it because it has the word tax and because there's a lot of scaremongering and really false stories. Kathy talked about some of them, but really false stories out there about what would happen or, oh my gosh, if we do this, our legislators can raise our taxes. Hello, people, they've raised our taxes.
Right.
They can raise our taxes. It's just it's not even a nuance. It's like a sledgehammer of misleading information about what could happen. But we need 60% of the people who vote on the amendment to vote for the amendment, a supermajority, or 50% plus one person of everyone who votes in the election, whether or not they voted on it. So we have a little bit of a daunting task ahead of us. That was a really bad phrase for me to put together. Forget what I just
Freudian
said.
slip.
But we believe that public education is going to get us there because it's so important. Nobody looks around Illinois and thinks we have plenty of money for our schools. Nobody looks around Illinois and thinks that people can get in for mental health screenings and can get their drug addiction treated.
Yeah.
We need money.
Well, and we did have that temporary tax increase that the Democrats passed.
The one that was during Quinn's campaign.
Yes, and no Democrat lost their seat over that. And we had money in the till because in reality, we have cut in so many places. We've cut at the legislature. We've cut all government services.
Yeah.
So services have been provided by nonprofits like Catholic Services, Lutheran Social Services, and they were getting their bills paid during that little 3-year window, the back pay, and then it goes away. And I think there was a day when Lutheran Social Services lost a third of its staff.
Yep.
I remember that.
There
We
was a
announced it
very,
on the radio when
very
that happened.
black day, but we have to realize that 9 out of 10 of your tax dollars go to pay for education, health care, human services, and public safety. So there's not a lot of squandering. And what I worry about when you keep cutting, like the legislative staff, Representative Cassidy years ago could have had a decent sized staff, but now what it allows is that outside entities provide research because the legislature doesn't have a great capacity any longer.
model.
Yes,
Exactly.
well,
and the lobbyists have so
Yeah.
much more power.
They
That's
do
incredible.
because you can't rely on just your staff.
Just incredible.
So think about what we want this state to be when Kathy's talking about going out there and talking to folks. Don't fall for that canard that I see on my Facebook page. That we're so cynical about government and what they will do. They're not even talking about rates yet because the people want to pin down the governor about what's the rate for this. That's something that's hammered out later after the people agree to this.
So Kathy Miller and Kathy Tate-Bradish, both of you knowing so much about this graduated tax effort, we've already seen a number of commercials run by the governor to open up the conversation and let people know. But the kind of education you just mentioned about what the rates are and how people should understand this in toto, what is going to be the grassroots manner of reaching voters, educating them, and delivering this very important vote?
Well, there's a big coalition, and most of the coalition members have people who go out and speak both to their legislators, but also to small groups. And one of the things that's so important about that is that it allows people to ask questions, because otherwise they're sitting there thinking, but I know people move out of state because of this or whatever.
Right.
And if you don't have a chance to ask a question and get it answered directly to your face, you don't know. It's hard to know who's pulling the wool over your eyes.
Absolutely.
And some of the editorials that we've been seeing lately are
bogus.
Scaremongering.
Right.
The cartoons that they use, it's just absolutely scaremongering. And they make it sound as though we're going to try some radical new thing that's going to backfire on us. And in fact, we're in the minority of states that don't have a graduated rate income tax, and we're in one of the worst fiscal shapes of any state in the country. But we need lots of money. We need more money than we have now, but we want to get it in a fair way. And things like sales tax are regressive. The flat tax is regressive. And I want to say something to what Kathy Miller talked about with all of these cuts. Since the year 2000, we've cut over 20% of our general fund budget. That's a lot of money. And the general fund, that's what Kathy was saying. It's healthcare, it's K through 12 education,
All the
it's
important
higher
stuff.
education, it's human services, and it's public safety.
Right.
But the legislature can't cut other things. So they are obligated by law, for example, to pay interest on all these loans they have to keep taking out to pay our bills. So they're not actually obligated by law to fund these other things. And therefore, that's where the cuts are made. And I will tell you, if you wonder about all of this college debt that we hear about, in the state of Illinois, since 2000, we have cut spending on higher education by 52%. It's
Well,
the
that is
biggest.
just appalling.
It is the biggest
It's our
cut
future.
that we've made. And all of these cuts are job cuts. When you think of the categories that Kathy and I were just talking about, we're cutting jobs. And when somebody loses a job, now they're not a taxpayer and they're not buying new shoes when they want to, right? And then they need unemployment. And then they need to avail themselves of the free services that are already being cut, right? So
total catch-22.
It's such a terrible cycle to find
ourselves in. You guys going to put together the booklet that teaches people that includes this
We're just
picture?
going to send Kathy Tate-Bradish out.
The League of Women Voters, we've got a slideshow. I was up. I used it before actually the governor's before it got passed.
Yeah.
So one of the big things we exhorted people to call your legislators. So now that's been passed. Now what we need to do is get out there and have people understand we don't have a spending problem. Yeah, you could look at something that sounds ridiculous, right? But we've cut and cut and cut, and now we've got unemployed teachers and unemployed daycare workers and unemployed social workers and
not enough help for
and
those
on
that
and
need
on
it.
and on.
When we have you two back to talk about the fair tax campaign that's been launched, we can maybe talk about why we didn't get a 3-play like Don Clark Netsch proposed years ago to adjust the sales tax rate and do real property tax reform. But in the meantime, with the minute we have left, what news or information sources do either one of you wake up to get going in the morning to hear about this kind of stuff and get a perspective?
To hear about this kind of stuff.
Well, or what do you check on to
Or maybe
catch
there's
up?
something else altogether. Your
Right.
favorite
Well, the
reading
first
stuff.
thing I do is I go to Facebook because I have these wonderful readers. People complain about Facebook, but I keep in touch with people around the world, but they read for me. So I get publications I would never open up. So I read Kathy Tate-Bradish's posts, and I think she
And I
reads
read Kathy
mine.
Miller's posts.
Yeah, but we get things from Illinois, like this
Policy
tax
Institute.
foundation.
No, not
not
Illinois
them,
Policy
but
Institute.
like the Tax Foundation or Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. When we want the real facts,
Sure.
this is where we'll go. But a lot of people are being my readers.
Yeah.
How about you, Kath?
I like Think Progress and Media Matters for more general international, national coverage. I'm a big listener to WBEZ because they cover the local stuff, especially education.
True
but
that.
they're starting to cover some more of the, tax things and what have you. And, some of the old standbys. The Atlantic does some pretty good in-depth coverage of a lot of this political stuff and also fun stories.
Well, this has got to be the first of a couple of visits because you've got a job to do in the next 6 months, right?
Yeah, we do.
Or 4 months. No,
No,
year
no,
and
We have a year
4
and a
months.
half.
Yeah,
before we talk.
a year and a half.
Year and a half.
Perfect.
Woo-woo.
Well, we'll see you again, and thank you so much for all the good work that you both have been doing. Kathy Tate-Bradish and Kathy Miller, really a treat to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for having
Absolutely.
us
You've
on.
been listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW Chicago 88.7 FM. Please check out our Spotify list. We want to thank Kelly Cassidy, Kathy Miller, and Kate Tate-Bradish. Next week, we have Chris Buddy, who's done a documentary film on blackjack professionals. We thought that was appropriate with gambling expanding. And we want
Someone from Friends of the River.
We want to wish our best to Lynn Orman, and also thanks to our engineer, Jake Levy. Do good in the world, because the world needs all the good we do. All power to the people. Take us out, Nina Simone.